How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we have an update in this civil lawsuit of Abby Zwerner case. Abby Zwerner is the teacher who was shot while teaching back in January 2023. She believes that there were warnings in place. Higher management, especially Assistant Principal Ebony Parker, failed to react accordingly, which led to her being shot by a 6-year-old student. So we have a lot to cover here. I want to talk about the results, a little bit of the back and forth during this case. And don't forget, we have a criminal suit coming up November 17th for Ebony Parker. That's the assistant principal or former assistant principal. She resigned a few days after, maybe it was around 19 days after the incident back in January. But there's video of the jury reading the verdict. So let's play that real quick. It's interesting. And let's see what the verdict says. Remember, she was suing for $40 million. So this is the update.
You may be seated. Thank you. Members of the jury, I understand that you have a verdict. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Will the foreperson please identify him or herself by number?
Foreman 37.
All right. If you can fold that piece of paper as you had it and hand that to my clerk. Madam Clerk, will you please read the verdict?
We, the jury, on the issues joined, find in favor of the plaintiff, Abigail Zwerner, and assess her damages at $10 million. The award interest beginning on June 1st, 2024.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any requests from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor.
Any requests from the defense?
That we schedule time for post-trial motions.
All right.
And
All-
judgment may not be entered on the verdict today.
All right. So the court will withhold entry of a judgment order in the case. The court will further reserve all rulings and hearings on post-trial motions for a later date to be set by the parties. Anything else to take up at this time, Mr. Beniozen? Ms. Douglas?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, your term expires tomorrow, so you were still admonished by the court that because you still are in term, that you are not to talk about any of the cases that you've heard during this term, but you do not need to call back. Thank you very much for your service. It is an important service to all of us, and I know it has been a difficult service, but one that is necessary for the resolution of disputes in this country that I am very proud that we get to exercise those rights. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are excused.
Please rise for the jury.
That's Abby. That's Abby. And that's Ebony Parker. So
You may be seated.
All right. The plaintiff and her attorneys are excused, as is the defendant and her attorney as well. You may follow, if you so desire, my bailiff.
So this really
Court
does set
stands in
momentum.
recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
So this really does set momentum in the right direction, because it really is about responsibility that's non-transferable. I mean, I watched a little bit of this back and forth here, and I got some notes here, but basically this was a chase for accountability, and then just the response from the defense was more of trying to push blame or minimizing. And I think we have a good outcome here. I'd love to get your thoughts, but let me just go over some of my thoughts here. A lot to cover here. Hopefully this answers some of your questions. And then November 17th, and I'll mention a little bit later on here, we start the criminal trial or the criminal proceedings for Ebony Parker. So in January 2023, first grade teacher, you saw her, the blonde woman. First grade teacher Abby Zwerner walked into Rich Neck Elementary School in Newport News, Virginia, just as she did every other morning. But that day, her life changed forever. Within hours, a 6-year-old student she taught shot her in the hand and chest, nearly killing her, after leadership reportedly ignored multiple warnings that the child had brought a gun to school. Zwerner survived and later filed a $40 million civil lawsuit against the Newport News School Board and assistant principal Ebony Parker, accusing them of gross negligence. And nearly 3 years later, a jury has spoken, awarding $10 million in damages. Now, guys, I did cover this case in detail. There's a lot here that I don't really feel I need to repeat, but I do got the full details in an older video. So I want to kind of really focus more on the verdict and what's to come. So after several days of testimony, a Virginia jury found Ebony Parker grossly negligent for failing to act on credible warnings that the student was armed. Verdict, $10 million total damage, $10 million total damages with interest beginning June 1st of 2024. Jurors concluded Parker had a duty to protect Zwerner and her students, and her failure to act directly led to the shooting. And Zwerner's attorney sought $40 million, citing the ongoing physical and psychological trauma she endures. Parker resigned. Just as an FYI, Assistant Principal Parker did resign later during that month of the shooting. It was January 25th, 2023 that I have her resignation. So the shooting happened, I believe, on January 6th. So that's 19 days. And since then, she never really publicly commented about anything about this case. And she still hasn't, that I know of. She's been pretty quiet except for the actual civil lawsuit. The courtroom arguments. So what I saw was accountability versus deflection. So throughout the trial, the courtroom became a test of where accountability truly lies. So the plaintiff's argument, so that's Zwerner's team, Zwerner's attorneys painted a picture of repeated, escalating warnings that were ignored by those in power. They argued that Parker's job was not simply administrative, it was protective, rooted in a duty of care toward both students and staff. The plaintiff contended that Parker had multiple clear chances to intervene. She could have searched the students, called law enforcement, or initiated a lockdown. And by choosing not to act, they argued she betrayed the responsibility that comes with leadership. The case, they said, was about accountability in decision-making when authority meets inaction. And to be honest with you guys, when you take these higher positions of responsibility, I mentioned this in the other video, that's why you get the extra money, because there is a responsibility, and that responsibility is for the higher level operations, which includes safety and security, especially in the school system. I'm very familiar with that because I do work in a prison, but we share a lot of things when it comes to management and where the priorities are. The defense argues, so this was Parker's team, so Parker's attorneys countered that she was being unfairly scapegoated for systemic failures far beyond her control. They maintained she relied on information from other staff members, lacked specific confirmation that the child had a gun, and crucially, did not have the authority under district policy to conduct a physical search herself. Her team told jurors that assistant principals were expected to defer searches to security staff or the principal, meaning Parker could not legally search the student without violating school procedures. They framed her as a mid-level administrator caught in a broken system, arguing that the board and superintendent policies limited her ability to act. The defense insisted this tragedy was a collective institutional failure, not one person's crime. Not one person's crime of omission. It's funny because if you guys ever notice in these cases, when it gets to this point, everybody just starts pointing the finger at each other. It's the system, it's the individual, and there's still no accountability. But all we do know at this point is when everybody's blaming everyone else, we still have a victim. So regardless of at this point of who's right or wrong, the victim stands there waiting for justice. So you get all this blaming back and forth, and then that's when the jury, like they did, has to make a decision. I'm tired of this blame game. I'm tired of one party minimizing their accountability. Just at this point, the buck stops here. So when you guys can't figure it out, we will. And that's going to happen again when we do the criminal hearings or for the criminal charges. I go into that a little bit here as we get later on into these scripts. So in the end, jurors sided with Zwerner's team, signaling that leadership titles carry non-transferable responsibility. They ruled that Parker's position required decisive action and that passing the buck up the chain was not a valid defense when immediate students and staff safety was at stake. The jury effectively concluded that policy limitations don't excuse moral duty and that leadership, by definition, requires action even when the rule book is unclear. I'll tell you something, even in my management position, I'm always trying my best to fill the gaps, try to balance, where you wind up having either conflict between policies or just not enough there. And what I try to do is I try every day to try to, utilize experience, discretion, because that's what I'm getting paid to do, but to make decisions that serve best for the house, serve best for what's expected. So again, when you're in a leadership position, I get you got policies and procedures, but sometimes, you got to make a decision. And later on, you got to figure out how that all fits in, because policies and procedures, they don't cover everything. And when you get higher up, you're getting paid to make those decisions, those discretionary decisions. You have the authority to make those decisions. You are granted that authority with that position. So obviously, when you have the authority and you don't do it, the ripple effect, and this could be the end result of that, or is the end result of that. So the warning and failures, according to trial testimony, 4 teachers warned Parker on the morning of the shooting that the 6-year-old might have a gun. One teacher reported that a student claimed he saw the weapon in his backpack. Another staffer pleaded with Parker to search the boy, but Parker allegedly dismissed the warning, insisting his pockets were too small to conceal a firearm. And less than an hour later, Abby Zwerner lay bleeding on her classroom floor. The case zeroed in on a haunting question. If multiple adults knew a gun was in that building, why didn't anyone stop it? And again, that's probably, they're definitely have to revisit policy and procedure on this. Maybe one day I can get Joe to discuss this, because he's very involved in school safety and security, but there's where probably policy is just not well written. I think when it comes to stuff like this, you got to try to do your best to try to push ownership down, because you really don't want a system that's so layered or so bureaucratic that you can't act when you need to act. So you want to push some level of ownership down so people can make decisions in the moment, kind of trust in their experience, because now the problem is maybe the concern here is that the assistant principal was probably forwarded with so many concerns that she got overwhelmed. And at the end of the day, it would have been good to have policies that kind of push ownership and some decision making for concerns like this a little further down, because you need immediate reaction. So I think one of the things that they're going to have to revisit when looking at these policies is when we have concerns like this, the authority for a quick reaction. We really don't have the time to defer it all the way up. So sometimes you have to trust the person to make an experienced decision and then be able to justify that decision. And then that's key. I mean, that's really key. I mean, right now we get so worried about, because she's even worried about optics, and it's going to cause chaos, or mom's going to be here soon. So, okay, but none of that really matters. Not in this. So I think what I tend to do is when I try to create policies, I let them know this is what I want. But I usually push down the how a little bit. Let's all figure out how we're going to work this together, because if you layer decision-making for emergency situations too far up, then it becomes too late. And I think that's a big concern in a lot of policies that require immediate action in that moment. And believe it or not, some people at the front line, they may not want that responsibility, but too bad. I think it's a responsibility that's a shared burden, because there's just too much that it could be costly. It's too much to lose. So it's a shared burden. I mean, yeah, there is some level of follow-up, but I don't know, we're going crazy with all these approvals, these layer process of approvals, when we may need to speed track this a little bit and trust in your staff that, they know enough about the job where they know how to act and then report it later on. You make the process too difficult, and this is probably the end result. So I would look at that. I would look at, why is the authority to do stuff that can protect the school only within this one individual's hands? Could we have maybe provided another layer or two that's a little closer to the where the concerns could be? This way, one, you also protect leadership at some sense, because they're a little further removed, but you can handle it now. Sometimes we also may misunderstand sometimes where sometimes when you notify the upper level, it's not for an approval to act. Sometimes it's just letting them know what you have done. Because you do have the authority to make a decision if it's life-threatening, because no one is going to tell you not to. No one's going to tell you, hey, whoa, you shouldn't have saved those lives. You forgot to call, these 6 layers of BS and wait for it. No, sometimes it's just the proper notification and then get the support on the back end. And then the funny thing is, if you make an action like that and you're not supported, then that's a good lawsuit. But at least right now we got the lives saved and we can figure that out in the long run. I know that in corrections, we get people to do this all the time. You work in real time. You make decisions in real time. You just learn the policies, the procedures, how to justify those decisions. And in the end, if there is a concern, at least everybody's okay. And we could deal with that on the back end without having to worry about, life's loss or someone getting badly hurt. So I think you have to try to start doing what you can to empower your workforce to make those decisions and let them know that, you can't defer this responsibility, because that could be another thing too. Don't forget, when you have these lawsuits and you're looking to win, you have one, the blame, but you also have one that could be deferring responsibility, and therefore there's the inaction. But if you're writing policies that are so micromanaged that doesn't give your people a chance to make empowered decision making, well, that's a bigger concern. So hopefully they look at these policies and say, hey, listen, guys, after this incident, we have to start pushing some of these decision makings down to, well, we don't want it. No, you're going to have it. You're going to have to make some of these decisions here too, because at the end of the day, we need action. We need it immediately. And who's the best people to make the action? Usually the people that are right on that front line. So sometimes it's not about getting the approval for the action, but making sure upper management knows what you're doing. Maybe bringing the kid to the office and saying, hey, this is what we're being told. I have the kid here. Brought him to the office. It's like everybody was waiting for a decision to be made when, I'm telling you, I would have just taken the kid. This is what they're saying. Come on, we're going to go to the office. Well, come on, we're going to go to the office. We're going to go bring this up to and address it. And I'll get a smack. If I think a kid's got a weapon, I'll go through his pockets. I don't care. And if a parent wants to say, I'm sorry, we had this reason, and I guess the kid didn't have a weapon, or the kid did, but let's say the kid didn't. All right, but I had to confirm it because it was going around. And if something was to happen and I didn't do my due diligence, this is where I'd be. Sometimes we get so concerned about the rights of one that we jeopardize the rights of the many. So the $10 million award compensates Zwerner for medical costs and 6 surgeries following gunshot wounds to her hand and chest, lost wages during months of recovery, and emotional trauma, so PTSD, anxiety, and depression, pain and suffering for permanent damage that limits use of her left hand. We saw that in the video where they were trying to, in the court, they were showing you with the professional how she had very limited movement. She spent nearly 2 weeks hospitalized. A bullet that narrowly missed her heart remains lodged in her chest, and reports indicate the verdict is entirely compensatory, compensation. No punitive damages were publicly listed. So I want to do about payment, immunity, and insurance. So post-trial motions, because you heard the defense lawyer say, they're going to do stuff post-trial. So Parker's attorneys can still file motions to reduce or overturn the verdict, delaying final judgment and payment. The insurance coverage. Parker is covered by the Virginia Risk Sharing Association. That's the VRSA, which insures many public entities, including the Newport News School Board. Because she acted within her employment scope, VRSA is expected to handle payment, though coverage could still be contested. I saw qualified immunity, but this is why it doesn't apply, because someone brought it up to me, so I looked it up. This is just an opinion. If you guys know more, let's have that dialogue. I want the comments. As I learned, some observers have questioned whether Parker should have been protected by qualified immunity, a legal doctrine that shields public officials from personal liability unless they violate clearly established law. However, qualified immunity applies mainly to federal civil rights cases under Section 1983, not the state-level negligence claims like Zwerner's. This case was built on gross negligence, meaning Parker's actions went beyond ordinary carelessness to show a reckless disregard for safety. So under Virginia law, gross negligence strips away immunity, even for public employees. In essence, the court found that Parker alleged inaction wasn't a policy mistake. It was a personal failure of judgment so severe that immunity no longer applied. And guys, I'm in a business. I'm in an administrative position. I work in a prison, and we're always covered. But if they interview us, and if the AG's office finds out that we didn't do what we were supposed to do, or that we didn't act in accordance to what the expectations are of the agency, they won't cover us. And now you're on your own. So negligence, disregard for the law, whatever it may be, they won't cover you. So that qualified immunity does have its parameters. So I agree with this. Legal experts note that this ruling draws a sharp line, so public officials aren't immune when their decisions show conscious indifference to foreseeable harm. So that distinction made Parker personally liable, marking a rare case where a school administrator faces financial accountability for an action during a student-related crisis. So if coverage holds, VRSA would pay the $10 million plus interest. Parker avoids personal ruin, but retains the gross negligence finding. If coverage is denied, Parker faces criminal prosecution that could influence her financial liability, because they're hoping that the insurance will cover it, but if the insurance doesn't, this is where we're at. The criminal case, the next chapter. So separate from the civil judgment, Ebony Parker has been indicted on 8 felony counts of child neglect, 1 for each bullet found in a 9mm pistol. That's strong. That's the 9mm pistol, the Taurus pistol that the 6-year-old brought to school. Prosecutors allege that Parker's inaction and disregard for repeated warnings constituted reckless indifference to the safety of children under her supervision. Her criminal trial is scheduled to begin November 17, 2025 in Newport News Circuit Court. Now, each felony child neglect count in Virginia, I saw, carries a potential sentence of 1 to 5 years in prison, meaning Parker theoretically faces up to 40 years if convicted on all counts, though such a sentence is considered unlikely. And that would be if it was consecutive. You know, I don't know how far this would go, but they could also do that concurrent. But that's if it goes that far. Legal analysts say a plea deal remains possible given her lack of prior criminal history and the potential overlap between her criminal case and the civil verdict. As of now, Parker has entered a plea of not guilty and remains free on bond, maintaining that she followed policy and never intended harm. Now, remember, it's a lot less to prove in a civil suit. So this outcome, I get it, but it may not be enough to hold weight for criminal charges. So the broader implications, this verdict carries national weight for school accountability. What must administrators do when credible safety warnings arise? How far can they go in searching a student? And when tragedy strikes, who bears responsibility, the individual, the district, or the system? For Newport News, the outcome sends a clear message. Ignoring red flags is no longer a failure of communication. It's a failure of leadership. That failure cost the teacher her health and a district its credibility. A little bit of a spin here. This whole case would be a whole different ballgame if it was a student that got killed or shot. Either way. Because now it's going to go into a systemic level of inaction. Because then it wouldn't just be Ebony Parker. They may even go after the teachers for not, doing something as well. Whether policy said something or not, they would probably be chasing the teachers as well. So it would have been interesting. Not that you want this to happen, because I don't mean it that way. But if it was, after seeing this case, if there was another incident where it was very similar and a student got shot, God forbid, but hear me out. Everybody would be pulled in on this side of the table with someone like Ebony Parker. So I just thought it'd be, I'm not saying that to me, would just, I don't want to say it's interesting as you want it to happen, but, you would see a whole different ball game being played. That's what I meant. Beyond the headlines, this verdict redefines accountability. It reminds principals and assistant principals that leadership is not about authority, it's about responsibility. It shows that when lives are on the line, inaction has consequences. The $10 million isn't just compensation, it's a declaration that the duty of care tied to leadership carries real legal and moral weight. At its core, this verdict is accountability personified, a courtroom acknowledgement that leadership cannot look away when warning signs appear. Just thinking, because again, if it was, I'm just going back to it. If it was a student that got shot, all this back and forth between the teachers and the assistant principal would have showcased some type of negligence or something, or policy concerns, whatever it is, that would have probably led to a win for the family of the student who got shot. So where does this case go from here? Parker's attorneys are preparing post-trial motions. The school board and superintendent were dismissed before trial, leaving Parker as the sole defendant. So no board appeal is pending. Criminal case on November 17, 2025 will test whether her inaction rises from civil negligence to criminal culpability. Interest on the civil award will continue to grow until paid in full. And they mentioned that when they read the decision out. Zwerner's legal team emphasizes that the verdict is about systemic change, not merely compensation. A reminder that school safety depends on decisive, accountable leadership. Yeah, I agree, but accountable at all levels too. Leadership isn't just those in the higher position. Leadership is people that take action. Additional context. The shooting occurred 2 days after the student returned from suspension for slamming Zwerner's phone on the ground. His mother, Deja Taylor, pled guilty to state child neglect and federal firearm marijuana charges. She's serving 2 years in a state prison and 21 months federally. Since recovering, Zwerner has completed a cosmetology program but has not returned to teaching while her hand continues to heal. She has stated she has no plans to return to the classroom. Closing reflection, the case isn't just about negligence. It's about a system that refused to listen. A 6-year-old carried a loaded gun to school. Teacher sounded the alarm. Administrators dismissed it, and a teacher nearly died. Now that teacher stands vindicated. Her body still bears the scars, but her victory reshapes how America defines accountability in its schools. Abby Zwerner's case is both a cautionary tale and a landmark in leadership accountability. Guys, I searched this real quick. I remember I kind of going back to, was a student that got shot and all this chaos was happening. I came up with this. Qualified and sovereign immunity would have been much stronger. So if the victim were a student, the case likely would have been filed by the student's parents, and that changes everything in Virginia and most states. Love your thoughts on this. School employees and boards are given broad protection from lawsuits brought by students because of the governmental immunity doctrine. We kind of talked about that, which protects public schools performing educational duties. The school district could have claimed sovereign immunity, arguing that safety decisions are a governmental function, not a personal one. Ebony Parker might have qualified for qualified immunity or statutory immunity as a school employee performing discretionary duties, but the case could have been dismissed much earlier unless lawyers could prove gross negligence or willful disregard. There's the back and forth. An extremely high legal bar when the victim is a child in the system. So ironically, Abby Zwerner's position as a teacher, an employee, not a student, removed many of those immunity protections. The jury could view Parker's inactions as a workplace safety failure, not a policy decision. So that's interesting. So ironically, Abby Zwerner's position as a teacher, an employee, not a student, removed many of those immunity protections. I thought that was interesting. So the jury could view Parker's inaction as a workplace safety failure. So she sues as an employee, not as a student. These laws. So civil damages would have been harder to recover. So if the victim were a student, the family could still file a civil lawsuit, but the school board and administrators would likely be shielded by sovereign immunity. The case might have been restricted to gross negligence or constitutional claims, both notoriously hard to win. And the payout, even if successful, would probably be smaller or settled quietly, not the $10 million judgment we saw here. So this was really about employee versus employer and the safety guaranteed in the workplace for an employee. In short, it's much easier to hold a school accountable for an unsafe workplace than for student injury, and that's legally speaking. That's interesting, guys. I hope you find this interesting. And the duty of care standard is different. For a teacher like Zwerner, Parker's legal duty was to ensure a safe work environment for staff and students, something that can be enforced through state tort law. For a student, the school duty is educational supervision, which court interpret much more loosely. Unless the staff member acted with reckless disregard, which is very hard to prove, most student-related shootings fall under tragic but legally protected territory. Public reaction would still be intense, but the case would likely die in pretrial. If a child had been shot under the same circumstances, there would be a massive public outrage and likely criminal charges against the same parties, including Parker, but the civil suit would almost certainly have been dismissed or capped early because of qualified or sovereign immunity defenses. The district could still settle, but it wouldn't set the same legal precedent that the teacher-led lawsuit did. So if a student had been the victim, the criminal case against Parker for child neglect would still exist, but the civil case would likely never have reached a jury, or it would have ended in a modest confidential settlement. So they're saying the criminal case against Parker for child neglect would still exist, but the civil case would never have likely reached a jury, or it would have ended in a modest confidential settlement. There would be no $10 million verdict, and qualified immunity would likely have protected the school officials. Because the victim was a teacher, the court treated this as an employee safety failure, not a student discipline case. And that difference stripped away immunity and opened the door for a landmark verdict. Hey, you learn something new every day. As always, guys, if you like the content, please, you can buy me a cup of coffee. Link to that is in the description, or I have it on the top of my YouTube channel. As always, guys, stay safe. More videos to come, and try to check out all my content, guys. I cover things from a very unique perspective. I bring good gets. Had a great dialogue yesterday with Siobhan Scott, a psychotherapist, and we talked about the family dynamic for the Jacqueline Torres Garcia case, Mimi. What happened to her, how horrible. Well, more videos to come. As always, guys, stay safe.